Does anybody have any questions before we get started? I had some good questions in the email about the upcoming assignments. So let me go over a few answers that I can share with everybody. So for example, the paper that you just turned in was basically to give us an informational overview of the controversy that you want to do for this research paper. Okay. Some of you have changed your mind. That's fine. You just need to make sure that you settle on a topic before the first draft is finished. The first draft is due when? For the research paper? Everybody knows, Monday. Okay, so it's going to be an 8 to 10 page paper. For your first draft, you want to have 5 or 6 pages to work with. Okay, and just to go over some of the elements that you need, right? We've talked about throughout class, you need an intro technique. So let me let some people in. So you're going to need an introduction. For the research paper, you might want to consider that startling fact or statistic. Quote. Story still works, right? Appeal to our emotions. So one of the things you want to be looking for as you're going through and doing your research is this something interesting that I could use to get everybody's attention when I start my paper? Okay. So you're going to work on an outline for Thursday that'll be due, which basically goes over each of these elements. And you're going to need some background information, because we have to know how you define something or what the current laws are. We may not be as familiar with them as you are. So you need to give us some background on the current issue. Okay. You can take many of your facts from your old paper if they apply to the argument that you want to make. That's one of the reasons I wanted you to do the last paper, is so you not only would have a good overview and come to a decision based on research, but also you have now sort of a base level of research that you can use to build on the paper. So yes, you can. Good question. Some people aren't clear, like since we've been talking about the opposition. So I said you had to have also 3 points, right? 3 points at least, more is even better, to support your thesis. So if you believe that school dress codes are sexist, you have to have 3 reasons that support that. Now, someone asked if like you do 2 supporting reasons and then 1 opposition point. You still are going to do at least 3 reasons that support you, but then you want to address the strongest opposition, okay? And generally, one of the ways you can organize your paper is like you bring out your point in support of your thesis. So school dress codes are sexist for this reason. And then you bring out anybody who disagrees with whatever point you just made, who's going to contradict what you said. Or you can do the opposite. If you feel like everybody's really opposed to what you're saying when you're trying to persuade them, address the opposition first and then have your answer afterward. You guys follow me? It's sort of like you sort of knock down all the doubts in their mind before they can get in your way of you persuading them. That makes sense? The one potential way is to do opposition point, your answer. Opposition point, your answer. These are all elements that you're going to need in the draft, right? An introduction, background information, 3 points to support your thesis, answers to the strongest opposition points against you. Okay, that's a lot to include in 5 pages. You want to be thinking about that. So now that you kind of hopefully have an idea, if you haven't done, like if you changed your topic, you're going to have to start a little bit more from scratch. But I looked over everybody, their subject worksheet. A couple of you guys had topics that are a little bit too big, so I just asked you to narrow it down and then email me, because one of the reasons I have you do the assignment worksheet is to make sure you're on the right track before you get started on the big paper. So if I asked you to narrow down your topic or tweak it a little bit, make sure that you go in Blackboard and look at my comments on subject worksheet 1, so that if I ask you to email me and sort of, clarify your topic, that you can do that, so that we can make sure as you go forward that you're not trying to cover too much, because it'll make your research a lot harder if you're trying to cover a huge area. Does that make sense? So check my comments on assignment 1. And if I ask you to email me, please do so. Some of you, it looks like your focus is fine. And I just was like, okay, that sounds good. Keep going. Okay. I want to make sure you're focused on a controversy. I want to make sure you're not trying to cover too much, because there's a lot that you have to accomplish in here. All right. Any questions about that so far? So even if you're going to address the opposition, you still need at least 3 points that are on your side that support you. Okay. So there are 2 ways, right, that we talked about that you can deal with the opposition. What are they?
Oh.
On two things. What was he doing in, what was Eminem doing in the rap battle? Yeah, basically you shoot their accusations down or you refute them. Okay, you're wrong, and here's why. Now, he wasn't doing that in his response necessarily. I mean, at the end he was, but the first part, he spent some time doing what? Getting out ahead of it by acknowledging, right? He acknowledged everything that he thought the guy was going to say, right? This does not hurt you. In fact, it helps your ethos, right? That is your appeal and credibility as the author. Let's look at an example again.
If you don't wake up and pay attention,
Negro,
you asleep.
I swear to God, I've been open.
Huh? What you say?
So
What the?
in this example, as it's saying, is you can pose the argument. You have to anticipate your audience's objections, either refute their objections like we talked about, or acknowledge they have a point. Sometimes you have to look at who you're arguing against, because sometimes you can unintentionally offend your audience, which will hurt your ethos. So if you're talking to teenagers, right, and you say something like teenagers aren't responsible enough to do X, Y, and Z, probably not an argument that's going to appeal to them, right? Because you're saying something offensive about that as a group. Same thing if you're arguing to a certain race or gender, you have to look at what arguments you're using and are they potentially offensive to your audience. Okay. So we're going to anticipate the opposition.
Maybe I should call because I filled it out. I got my number. And
you're going to be respectful of their opinion. Okay. So this is the example. Schools should move to a year-round curriculum. Okay. And one of the point one supporting that argument is because students lose a lot of knowledge. They've done studies that show that we just forget a lot of stuff if we're not in school. There's sort of a brain drain that goes on if you're not continuously learning. So because students lose much of the previous year's information and they have to be retaught, it wastes time, right? But the opposition may disagree. Okay, they may say, yeah, that's not necessarily true that you lose. So then you have to bring out, like you can say, no, you're wrong. Here are the studies, or here's the evidence that I have that supports that we do lose knowledge and information. Okay, so they're saying, no, your argument is faulty. I'm going to refute it. Okay. But you have to signal that you're moving to the other side. So remember all those transitions that we've talked about using to signal you're changing from one idea to another. So those against changing to our current 9-month school calendar to year-round, one argument is there's no conclusive research that supports it has any academic benefit. However, this is untrue. Okay, so you signaled you're about to present the other side, and also what you're thinking of it and how you're framing it. And then you bring in your evidence. Researchers have found this, this, and this. Here's a quote. Students have tested, show higher test scores if they're in year-round education. Okay. Or you can concede the opposition again. So in the example here, they're going to say those against year-round school. So this is, again, is another way to introduce the other argument without sounding like you're switching to their side. So you're not saying, I believe this, you're saying those against it or opponents argue that the cost of running many of the aging school buildings year-round is too high. So basically it's going to cost too much more for air conditioning and maintenance and all of that. And then you say, well, it's true that keeping schools open throughout the year may cost more. The higher costs could be subsidized by making buildings available for community rental to offset those costs. So maybe rent them out to the community during the year for events, and do other ways to compensate for losing the money. So you can see they have the point, but you say, here's something we could do to ameliorate that or have an answer to that. Okay. So again, 2 examples. No, you're wrong, and here's why, and here's my evidence. Or yes, you're correct, but we could do this, but I still have 3 points on my side. All right. So remember that that's something that has to be in your paper. Yes. So when you present your points, and sometimes there's an opposite point, right, that correlates with your points. You guys follow me? You present your points and address any opposition to them. Now, sometimes the opposition point isn't just like an immediate response to one of yours, it's a different point. If so, you can just say, here's another problem, right? Like maybe your argument wasn't that it would be cheaper to have school year round, right? But that's something the other side brings up. So in the case of that paper, they had to address it because it was one of the big arguments against theirs, right? Against their perspective. But then they argued directly against one of their points, which is that that students don't lose too much information. So in that case, you really want to respond to that point right where you present your evidence. Otherwise, people might be questioning it. And if you don't have an answer and they're still waiting and waiting throughout your whole paper for the answer, it's kind of unsettling for somebody who's trying to be persuaded if they don't get an answer right away to questions they have for the opposition. Makes sense, everybody? Cool. So again, that's one of the things you're going to incorporate into your first draft. Now I want to talk about the next assignment, which is the annotated bibliography. So you can use some of the sources that you used in your last paper, okay? But basically you're going to take 6 sources, and an annotated bibliography is different from a works cited, okay? It's similar in some ways. It has the MLA or source information that would let us get back to it, like the author's name, the title, the publication. But then it adds a couple other pieces of information. One is, here's a basic summary. This article discusses year-round schooling and how students perform better on tests if they are in school all year long, okay? It has numerous studies, it brings them together, it discusses, and then you tell me, that's the first piece of information, then how is this going to be used in your paper? So basically, I will use this as supporting evidence and cite the studies to show that it is true that students tend to lose knowledge over the school year, okay? So let's watch a little video that kind of goes into this is how you format the annotated bibliography, all right?
Bibliography is. If you are watching this video, I just want to remind you that I made this video for my high school honors English class in Indiana. So just giving you some context in case I may show you things that are different from your teacher or your professor, but just to let you know, I do follow MLA format for everything. And this annotated bibliography reflects the latest changes in the
She's using the
MLA,
most recent edition.
8th edition handbook. Okay, so first thing I have to explain to you exactly is what an annotated bibliography is. There's a difference between a bibliography and a works cited. Bibliography has to do with reading. It's just stuff that you have read. A works cited isn't developed until after you conduct your research, and the works cited is the work and the work, the research, the literature, everything that you directly cite and source within your paper. So bibliography and works cited are 2 entirely separate things. And yes, you can have both. That you may have at the end of your research paper your works cited, those materials that you directly resourced and referenced within your paper, and you may additionally have a bibliography. And all that does is it just tells the reader of your work what else you have done to read and research to be more well-rounded, even if you have not directly referenced it in your research paper. So at the very beginning part, like the very first step of doing a research paper, making an annotated bibliography is very helpful because it allows you to think critically about your sources. I mean, how often, whenever you are doing a research project, one of the first things that your teacher tells you to do is, okay, I want you to find me 5 sources, and you're a little lazy butt, and the only thing that you do is you find the first 5 things that come up on a Google search that match your keywords, but you don't actually look to see if it's worth it. An annotated bibliography forces you to do that. So now that I have told you the difference between a bibliography and a works cited, let's break down the annotating. If you annotate something, that means that you are taking notes. So this is a bibliography, a list of Readings that also has notes on it. All it is a list of citations done in MLA format, and underneath each one of them, there is a short description of what type of source that it is and how it will be useful for your paper. Okay, this is, again, helps you to think critically and prove to your instructor that you are using valuable sources. So in order to set this up, you're gonna have your document with your page number, last name, and the page number in the upper right corner. Have your MLA heading with your name, the teacher's name, the name of the class, and the date that the work is due. And then have your title be Annotated Bibliography, and then your topic. So this here is just for an imaginary research paper that I would be doing about the influence of Hoosier writers. And so I'm just going to go through each one of these step by step. So you can see for the first one here, we have the complete poetical works of James Whitcomb Riley, published in Bloomington by Indiana University Press in 1893. You can see with the new MLA format, we only have periods after authors and titles. Everything else has commas between it until we get to the end. So you can see I have my citation, and I have my hanging indent, and then there's a short paragraph after that is not indented, okay? And here's the description. This source is an anthology of all verse by Riley. It contains no academic essays or commentary, only the poems themselves. They're in chronological order, not by subject matter. This resource will be good for studying what Riley wrote at certain times in his life. So what I have done here is I said explicitly what type of source it is. Notice I just didn't say, this is a book. More specifically, this is an anthology of poetry. Okay, and clarified that it did not have anything else. It was just the poems. Then I also included a line about why this paper, or why this.
So this is a scholarly article that studies whether athletes are affected by lack of sleep. Okay, or this is a scholarly article that surveys athletes on their opinions about the best time to practice sports. So you basically are telling us what kind of source it is, and a little bit about summarizing the content.
This book would be good for me. Okay, so I specifically said exactly what it is, not just that it is a book. Next one. Ralph D. Gray was the compiler and editor of Indiana History, a book of readings, published in Bloomington by Indiana University Press in 1994. This is a collection of essays.
I kind of overwrote her, but this last sentence here, this resource would be good for studying what Riley wrote at certain times in his life. So she's doing more of a literature paper. What you guys will be doing is saying this source would be good to support my argument that I'm making that school dress codes can be sexist toward girls, specifically when it comes to body image or something. You know, give us a little bit of information on why did you pick this source? Why did you think it would potentially be useful to your paper?
Again, being specific about what type of source it is, all right? You can pause this video at any time and stop and read each one of these individually. I'm not going to read all of them to you. Next one, Haven Kimmel wrote A Girl Named Zippy, Growing Up Small in Moreland, Indiana, published in New York, Broadway Publishers, 2001. This is a memoir. You notice I kind of give a little bit of an extra space between each one of these before going on to my next one.
So it says this helps form an idyllic image in Hoosier writing. However, each essay focuses on a person, not on the history or place or particular settings. So they're getting in depth into how the source supports whatever analysis they're going to make of the piece of literature. Okay. So let's talk about some potential reasons you would choose sources for your paper, right? So you choose sources to do what? Why do you choose a source, and why do you think it might be useful? What are some potential uses for sources? Yes, Brandon, they have evidence that will back up your claim, right? So basically, there's some piece of evidence, and for the annotated bibliography, you can be specific. This will back up my claim that school lunches help kids to perform better academically. Okay, so don't just say this will help support my paper or this will help support my point. That's too vague. So tell me specifically what point it will support. So you might say something like, the study shows that schools, sorry, Adeline, I'm picking on your topic, with universal school lunch programs have higher test scores. I will use it in my paper to support that universal school lunches are beneficial to education. The schools spend, a lot of money trying to do just that, raise test scores. So if you can do something like that, that is proven, like just make sure every kid has a lunch, then, that's something that pays off, that also helps them nutritionally. It helps bolster your argument. Sometimes a source, some of you guys have found sources that have like others, especially the scholarly ones, will list a bunch of sources they cited. Okay, you don't have to backtrack. This was a good question I had through the email. You only have to cite whatever source is in front of you. You don't have to cite all the sources they used. Okay, but that source can have a purpose. It can serve as a guide to other sources. Basically, it can give you a cheat sheet of other sources to go look at. Okay, so maybe the one that you're reading doesn't necessarily help your argument or address the opposition, right? But it's got a bunch of other stuff that it used for information that's credible that you can go and check out and see if it might potentially be useful as a source for your paper, right? So that paper might not be useful itself, but it might be useful in terms of what it's already cited as sources. Then when you do go find that source, then you cite it if you use anything from it. You can use a source to address an opposition argument. So basically, you've got an essay that's entirely against your premise, okay? But you can pull some of their arguments out and say, I will use this to present some of the opposition points, and then respond basically to what they're saying and either refute it or acknowledge they have a point. Okay, so you can have a source that has a great quote for an introduction technique. Gives great background information. Cites expert opinions. So basically, you're just asking yourself, why and how am I going to use this source in my paper? Questions. I think what everybody else has asked through the email. Good question. Not necessarily everything on your annotated bibliography will end up on the works side of your paper. As she said, the annotated bibliography are things that you read that might potentially go in your paper, but also might just give you knowledge of the topic or give you a guide to other sources, right? The works cited will be only what you've used in your paper. But yes, you can use it if you have sources that are on your bibliography that are going to go in your paper, definitely. Yeah. That makes sense? The works cited is only what you have used in your paper. Only the sources that you've used in your paper. Good question. I know a lot of this can be confusing. And everybody is clear. This research paper should be focused on a controversy. You should take a position on that controversy, right? You should support it with your points, and you should answer the opposition. I want to review evaluating sources a little bit. So I have a little short video that again talks about the main things you should think about, because I know everybody likes to go on Google and Google Scholar and everything, and that's fine. Just remember, sometimes Google Scholar will try to make you pay for an article that you can usually get through the library for free. So don't give up on that article just because you found it on Google Scholar and there's a paywall. You know, go to the library and search for the same author, the same title of the article. Let's go over, again, how you evaluate sources that maybe aren't necessarily at the library.
Students often receive research assignments requiring the use of credible sources. But what does it mean for a source to be credible? Why is it important to use these sources? And how can you tell if a source is credible? When we describe a source as credible, we're basically saying that the information is high quality and trustworthy. Essentially, that we can believe what the source is telling us. When you use high quality sources to back up your points, you demonstrate your own credibility as a writer, thereby contributing to the overall effectiveness of your argument.
Helps your ethos.
Best quality research builds on other high quality research. This is true of both your own work and the work of professional researchers. There are several factors that contribute to a source's credibility. Among them are the author's level of expertise, her point of view, and the source's publication date. The author's level of expertise on the topic he or she is writing about can take the form of an advanced degree or other extensive experience in the field. A credible source often provides information about the author's credentials. Sometimes, however, the author's credentials may not be listed, and the publication itself can be the marker of quality. This is often true for some non-scholarly publications like well-respected newspapers and magazines, where the article's content is critically examined as part of the publication process. Another important component of a source's credibility is its point of view, in particular, its potential bias. Bias is an inaccurate or unfair presentation of information. In some cases, bias is intentional. A group with its own agenda may sponsor research or information, and the sponsorship may influence the results. Bias can also be unintentional. A writer's perspective may prevent him or her from being able to see all sides of an issue. Sometimes you need unbiased facts to support your point. But other times you might want people's opinions, and that's okay, as long as you acknowledge the source's perspective in your own work.
Just make it clear to
While
us.
bias can be difficult to detect, be aware that it can exist in any kind of source, including things you find through the library.
True.
In the academic publishing world, books and articles go through a rigorous editorial process, in which an editor or group of scholars evaluate the work's quality. When it comes to journal articles, this process is called peer review. Peer review articles are considered high quality
You guys
because
remember
the
peer review?
process helps to filter out sources that are written by unqualified or biased authors. Finally, with any source, consider when it was published or last updated. Even something that was once high quality can now be out of date and unsuitable for some purposes. If I needed current statistics on the average cost of college in the United States, a source published in the 1990s would be out of date. However, if I was looking at the increase in college tuition over the last few decades, a source from the 1990s might fit my purposes. Of course, not every credible source is appropriate for your research. Be sure to evaluate not only a source's trustworthiness, but also its appropriateness for your argument. For help finding credible sources or determining whether a source you found is credible, ask a librarian.
So remember all of the things that we've talked about when you're evaluating your sources. Who is this person writing it, or what is the publication? Do they have an agenda, right? Do they have a vested interest in sort of pushing the viewpoint that they're talking about? Is it research versus is it an opinion piece? Because like they said, is you can use opinion information as long as you feel like the person is credible and adds to your argument. Okay. So the annotated bibliography, I moved it back a little bit. Originally I had it due today, but I wanted to talk a little bit more about it. So Wednesday is when we're shooting for the annotated bibliography. Like I said, you can take some of the sources used in your last paper if they apply. If not, then you're gonna need to make sure you evaluate the sources carefully and going forward, for even from your last paper, and then tell us, why'd you pick this source? You know, here's the MLA information to get back to the source, the author's name, the title, okay? And this is what kind of source it is, and this is why I think it might be useful in my paper and how I'm gonna use it. Okay. Questions? So this assignment is really about just being thoughtful about what sources you're choosing, that you can choose the best sources to help you make your argument, because the better sources you have, the easier it's going to be to write your paper. If they're doing what you need to do, like support your points, you know, other than just randomly grabbing some sources that look like they might be on your topic, you actually have to say, is the information in here going to be useful? And is it going to perform a function in my paper, like giving background information, supporting a point with evidence, providing an expert quote, addressing the opposition, right? So that's the next assignment, annotated bibliography on sources you might potentially use for your research paper. Okay. So please check the comments on your subject worksheet and make sure I haven't asked you to email me. And if I have, then think about your topic and please email me with your update, tweaking your topic area, okay? I'll be online for a couple hours after this. If anybody has any questions, I'll be checking my email. Any questions before we run out of time? We're about done here. I will watch my email. Otherwise, I'll see you guys tomorrow.